Sabah was never just a forgotten piece of land on the map. For the Philippines, it was a question of history, sovereignty, and a claim that many believed was never truly surrendered. Long before Malaysia was even created, before the British finished drawing borders across Southeast Asia, Sabah was already at the center of a growing political storm. And when the British moved to place Sabah inside the new Federation of Malaysia, one Philippine president refused to stay silent. He challenged Britain, confronted Malaysia, and made it clear that the Philippines would not simply walk away. This is the story of the president who refused to give up Sabah. Hello everyone! Welcome back to Fun Fact. If you enjoy fascinating history and powerful stories, hit like, subscribe, and share this video with your friends. Before Malaysia was even officially formed, the Philippines had already raised strong objections to the inclusion of Sabah in the planned federation that would later become Malaysia. In 1962, Sultan Muhammad Ismail Kiram officially transferred the proprietary rights of Sabah to the Republic of the Philippines. This gave Manila legal standing to pursue the claim internationally. Then, Philippine President Diosdado Macapagal wasted no time and formally protested Britain's plan to include Sabah in the new Federation of Malaysia. President Macapagal argued that Sabah rightfully belonged to the heirs of the Sultan of Sulu, and those rights had already been transferred to the Philippine government. Tension across the region was rising. This dispute now involved multiple nations and territories. Among them were the United Kingdom, driven by its strong determination to create a new nation through a federation of Singapore, Malaya, Sarawak, Brunei, and North Borneo, or Sabah as it is known today. The Sultanate of Sulu, which strongly opposed the inclusion of Sabah in the British-backed federation, believing that the Sultanate of Sulu, including Sabah, rightfully belonged within the historical sphere of the Philippines. The Philippines, which became the legal administrator of the Sultanate of Sulu's proprietary rights over Sabah after Sultan Ismail Kiram officially transferred those rights to the Philippine government, denounced Britain's plan and lodged formal protests against the British government. Malaya, which supported the British position because the future Federation of Malaysia was about to be formed, and control over Sabah would ultimately be passed to its government. Brunei, which was originally one of the 5 territories intended to form Malaysia, later backed out after the Brunei Revolt, when Bruneians attacked government offices, military forces, and key establishments because they opposed joining Malaysia. Indonesia, which eventually sided with the Philippines and opposed the British-backed federation, as President Sukarno strongly rejected what he saw as a British-sponsored project designed to strengthen Western influence in Southeast Asia. To ease the growing tension, the British came up with a plan and called it the Manila Accord. To many Filipinos, this was a deceitful plan from the very beginning because Britain still worked behind the scenes, ignored its true spirit, and pushed forward with the formation of Malaysia anyway. The agreement stated that the people of Sabah would be consulted and asked whether they preferred to become part of the federation the British were forming. The result favored joining the federation. However, the Manila Accord clearly stipulated that the result of that consultation should not prejudice the Philippine claim. In other words, the Philippines never agreed to surrender its claim, and the outcome of the survey had nothing to do with its legal position as the rightful claimant of Sabah. The Philippines never accepted the loss of Sabah and never agreed to abandon that claim, regardless of the outcome of the consultation. The Manila Accord was signed in 1963 by the Philippines, Malaya, and Indonesia. But despite that agreement, the British moved forward and formed the federation. In 1963, Malaysia was officially formed, and worse, Sabah became one of its most important territories. From that moment on, the problem evolved again. What was once largely a dispute between the Philippines and Britain now became a direct conflict between the Philippines and Malaysia. Then, Ferdinand Marcos Sr. became president of the Philippines. If there was one Philippine president who pushed hardest to recover Sabah, it was President Ferdinand Marcos Sr. He did not treat Sabah as a forgotten historical dispute, and he constantly applied diplomatic pressure against Malaysia. In 1968, during the Bangkok talks on Sabah, Malaysia entered the negotiations determined to reject the Philippine claim and bury the issue for good. They came in aggressively, even planning a military demonstration in Sabah during the talks, and showed open disrespect by walking out in the middle of the peace negotiations. Marcos struck back. He rejected Malaysia's position, immediately recalled the Philippine ambassador from Kuala Lumpur, and suspended relations and cooperation with Malaysia. Then came an even bigger move. On September 18, 1968, Marcos signed Republic Act No. 5446, officially including Sabah within the national boundaries shown in Philippine maps and official references. This infuriated Malaysia and triggered strong protests from Kuala Lumpur. But Marcos was still not finished. On October 15, 1968, he brought the Sabah claim to the United Nations, placed it before the world, and made it clear that the Philippines would not quietly surrender what it believed was its rightful territory. We'll talk more about President Marcos Sr. and how far he was willing to go to recover Sabah in another video. What makes this even more interesting is that while all of this was happening, Malaysia continued paying the annual dues for Sabah on time. Year after year, the payments continued. But this time, they came up with an alibi. They twisted the very agreement itself and tried to make it appear that the payment under the lease agreement was for cession, not rent, even though the historical interpretation from the Philippine side clearly pointed otherwise. Because from the very beginning, they never had any intention of returning the land they had leased from the Sultanate of Sulu. Before Malaysia was even officially formed, the Philippines had already raised strong objections to the inclusion of Sabah in the planned federation that would later become Malaysia. In 1962, Sultan Muhammad Ismail Kiram officially transferred the proprietary rights of Sabah to the Republic of the Philippines. This gave Manila legal standing to pursue the claim internationally. Then, Philippine President Diosdado Macapagal wasted no time and formally protested Britain's plan to include Sabah in the new Federation of Malaysia. President Macapagal argued that Sabah rightfully belonged to the heirs of the Sultan of Sulu, and those rights had already been transferred to the Philippine government. Then, Operation Merdeka emerged as one of the boldest and most controversial chapters in the Sabah dispute. Operation Merdeka was a secret military plan during the Marcos administration, designed to strengthen the Philippine position over Sabah. It was meant to be an unprecedented operation. Its objective was to secretly train selected Filipino Muslim recruits to infiltrate Sabah, build local support, conduct sabotage operations if necessary, and prepare the ground for the Philippines to strengthen its claim and eventually reclaim Sabah. They specifically chose Muslim recruits from Sulu, Tawi-Tawi, and Mindanao because many of them shared the same religion, culture, language, and ancestral ties with the people of Sabah, making it easier for them to blend into local communities, communicate naturally, and move without immediately attracting suspicion. Major Eduardo Abdul Latif Martolino was assigned to lead the mission. Martolino formed a special group to help him carry out the operation, manage the logistics, and supervise the training, which eventually took place on Corregidor Island. But somewhere along the way, the mission became deeply compromised. Martolino's group did not fully follow the original objective. There were allegations of misused funds, abuse of authority, torture, and worst of all, the killing of trainees so they could no longer report what was truly happening inside the training camp. None of this reached President Marcos until one survivor surfaced, and the media turned the story into a national firestorm. And when the media makes you its target, the attack is relentless. They strike hard and make sure the damage is fatal. The narrative spread aggressively, and the incident was turned into a powerful weapon against his administration. The situation quickly became more than just a military scandal. The people were angry, and naturally, his political enemies would never let such an opportunity pass without exploiting it. They moved fast, using public outrage to weaken his administration and turn the nation against him. What was originally a secret operation tied to the Sabah strategy was now being transformed into a full-blown national political crisis. In Mindanao, the controversy fueled deeper Moro resentment. In Manila, student protests and anti-government demonstrations intensified. The streets grew louder, the accusations became heavier, and the pressure on Malacañang became relentless. The entire operation had drifted far from the disciplined strategic plan Marcos originally intended. What was supposed to be a calculated move to protect Philippine interests had become a political disaster. Then came the first quarter storm of 1970. Massive demonstrations, violent street clashes, and direct attacks against the government shook the country to its core. The Philippines was no longer facing only the Sabah dispute. It was now battling internal rebellion, communist insurgencies, separatist unrest, and political warfare from within. Marcos was no longer defending just a territorial claim. He was fighting to keep the government itself from collapsing. Marcos was hit hard and deeply devastated. He was forced to step back from openly pushing the Sabah issue in the same aggressive way. But here's the thing. Ferdinand Marcos Sr. was never a pushover. Despite the political onslaught and the national crisis, he never abandoned the claim. He changed strategy. He made sure the Sabah claim would not disappear. He kept it alive in law, in diplomacy, and in national policy. Because for him, Sabah was never just a forgotten dispute. It was unfinished business. And even when the world moved on, Marcos made sure the Philippines never officially did. Because in the end, Ferdinand Marcos Sr. was not fighting for applause or political survival. He was fighting for a country he believed should never kneel, never forget, and never surrender what was rightfully its own. And perhaps, just perhaps, this explains why his son, Ferdinand Bongbong Marcos Jr., would never kneel and never surrender the West Philippine Sea. Because some battles are not inherited by choice, but by duty.